Good morning and good evening. Sri Kumar Swami College, Ausa, District Latur, State Maharashtra, India, finds this International E-Conference as an opportunity to welcome all honorable dignitaries, delegates, and participants here at the virtual platform. The topic of today's International E-Conference is the state of public education in Texas. The college, Sri Kumar Swami College, Ausa, is affiliated to Swami Ramananda Tirth Marathwada University, Nanded. The college undertakes number activities for students and stakeholders. The World Record Webinar Series, national and international conferences are the extended online platform of the college for the benefit of students, researchers, teachers, intellectuals, academicians, and for all those who seek knowledge. And all these things are going on very well. And behind it, there are a lot of efforts of the chief organizer, Honorable Principal Dr. M. Ambedkar, sir. Sir, I welcome you as the chairperson of the today's International E-Conference. Today, I feel immense pleasure to welcome the chief guest, the dignitary and keynote speaker, Honorable Hannah MacIntyre, ma'am, from Denton, Texas, USA. On behalf of the organizing committee of International E-Conference and Sri Kumar Swami College, Ausa, I heartily welcome you, ma'am, as the chief guest and keynote speaker. The participants who have joined here from the different parts of the country and all around the globe are eager to listen the keynote speech. So I would like to invite today's honorable chief guest, Hannah ma'am, for her keynote speech and presentation. Please, ma'am, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be here. I'm very excited to share my kind of research and thoughts with you. So thank you so much. I wanted to start out a little bit and give people some kind of background to my personal background, because I think it will fully contextualize what I'm speaking on further today. So I did grow up in Texas. This is my hometown. This is my dad's hometown. I currently work at the University of North Texas, and I am a third generation graduate from that university. So I began my professional work in outreach and education, working for a nonprofit. I built their risk reduction education and carried it into the community. So in that role, I spoke not only to students, but also to community members, including incarcerated offenders, including parolees, and everything from that to corporate headquarters at JCPenney's and graduate classes at both the University of North Texas and Texas Women's University, also in Denton, Texas. I sat on the steering committee in 2008 and took place in the federally mandated point-in-time homeless count in order to ensure services to our most at-need and at-risk community members, and have served in defense of the grants and assisted in grant writing in that role. After that, I began my role in public education. So I have taught in 2 large districts in the area. The first time I taught 9th grade. So my students were between 14 and 15 years old. I taught primarily world geography, but also scaffolded social studies. And I mentored and advocated for students, some of which were in my classroom and some of whom were not. So that included keeping track of their educational goals, keeping track of their performance, keeping track of the measurable qualities and quantities of their work, and documenting that and using it to craft an individual education program that best suits that student's needs. At that point, I moved to Louisville ISD, which was actually closer to home for me. And I worked in their dropout retention program. So this was a grant-funded program specifically aimed at getting students who had fallen through the cracks back into the system. and really addressing some of those gaps in knowledge and being able to help facilitate them moving forward in their life through the passage of standardized tests, through the ability to actually engage in the world around them in a more vocational capacity, and making those kind of inroads and connections. So while I was there, I taught U.S. history, U.S. government, economics, and sometimes world geography. We outreached and identified to particular students. And so on Fridays, we didn't hold class. We had class Monday through Thursday. We had 90-minute classes back to back. And I had students who literally came to class, went home, cooked dinner for their family, came back to class to finish again. And so very committed students, very easy to get behind trying to help them implement success. We also hosted non-traditional graduations and tried to, again, plug them into kind of that career readiness path that allows them to actually build a life moving forward. At that point, I really wanted more of a seat at the table as far as being able to influence education, if you will. Full disclosure, I am a third-generation educator on both sides of my family. My mother and grandmother taught, my dad and my grandfather both taught. I have several family members who work in education. And I, for a long time, didn't think that that's what I was going to do, and then got into it and was like, oh, wow, this is what I like. And it turns out what I'm good at. So very much feel like that was a calling that I kind of responded to. And at that point, I applied to graduate school so that I could have the vita that was necessary to really be able to address these things. So I went to Washington State University. I worked as a TA for 2 years in that process while finishing my master's degree, and then was an instructor of record for 5 years. So in my 2 years assisting in the classroom, it was primarily with gender and cross-cultural perspectives and 101. As an instructor, I taught gender and cross-cultural perspectives, introduction to anthropological theory, which was one of our required classes, speech, thought, and culture, and 101. So lots of different kind of pieces in there. My personal research has also involved education. So my master's thesis was a mixed methodological assessment of educational access for DFW students. So I looked at reasons for removal from the classroom, specifically in identity kind of politics space. So looking at LGBTQIA students compared with their cisgendered peers and the amount of access that they actually had. This consisted of surveys of public information. It consisted of ethnographic interviews with former students, people who were still working in the school system as educators, and people who were working in the school system as administrators. And so all of that kind of looked at together. In addition to that, I have replicated a national study truncated for DFW Metroplex, looking at the impact of GSAs, which are gay straight alliances, on creating those inclusive spaces in the classroom. The basic findings of those is that we did have more students removed and less educational rigor and engagement for students who did not kind of fall in line with the exact expectations and preferences of the systems, and specifically looking at some language pieces on that. My dissertation is looking in particular at representation and diaspora. So specifically, I am looking at the Indian diaspora in the DFW Metroplex and the way that they have, how they're represented and what that relationship to the representation looks like. So I looked at some public kind of more pan-Indian representations, and then I'm also doing interviews and surveys with members of the diaspora in the area for that. Currently, I work at the University of North Texas as a career coach for the College of Education. While I am finishing my degree, I'm also ABD at the University of, or Washington State University rather. And so in my capacity right now, I work with future teachers. So I'm in the College of Education. I work not only with future teachers, but also the other programs housed under the College of Education. But a lot of what I'm seeing with some of the future teachers and the concerns about them are very relevant to kind of what's happening in the classroom today and what's happening by and large for Texas as far as kind of the educational peril that we're in. So A couple of things I want to kind of cover off the front, and then I'm going to talk about some specific state legislation that is in the works right now and the potential impact from some of those things should they be implemented. So some of the concerns that we have that really speak to what the teacher shortage is right now, because we absolutely have a teacher shortage in Texas. So the students who are actually wanting to go into the classroom are not having nearly as hard of a time finding an ability to do that. But the number of students that we have that are really willing to engage in that capacity is dwindling. Some of the reasons behind that have to do with lower pay. They have to do with teachers being asked to take on roles that are not really traditional teaching roles, like carrying a gun in the school and being charged with dealing with an active shooter situation. We also have an incredible lack of support in the government and a lot of times general diminution from the community insofar as the valuation of teachers. Then when you add in COVID, everything gets a little crazy. So we already had some difficulties with accountability and some struggles in there that were very much exacerbated by dealing with the pandemic and kind of how all of that came together. One of the things in Texas that is very much relied upon is called the PEAMS report, and it has to do with the official reports of disciplinary removals and different things along those lines within the school system. And often what happens is these reports are valued above the actual reality in the school. And so as long as the report looks good, what's actually happening in the classroom and what's actually happening in the school is not always actually addressed. So in 2020 to 2021, the number of teachers leaving the profession in Texas rose by 26% from the previous year. In 2021 to 2022, it again rose by 16%. So we've got people leaving the classroom in droves. The current minimum state salary is $38,880, and that's with 5 years experience. So that's not an incoming teacher. That is somebody who actually has a significant amount of experience in the classroom. The way that this works in Texas is that base salary is offset by property taxes. So in some cases, this can be incredibly helpful. If you have the area to expand, and Texas is large, there are certainly lots of places that have been able to expand, you can expand that property tax base and fund your teachers and schools more fully. However, some of the spaces here don't have that option. And so there are districts, for instance, in this area, Lake Dallas has no place to go. And so their ability to offset that low cost or that low salary range is very limited because they only have so much property tax they can actually garner to offset some of that. There are particular things being pushed in addition to the general structures that are problematic also. So HB 100 is one of the House bills that is currently being looked at in the government here. And it would change the funding basis to enrollment rather than attendance. So currently, they at like 10 o'clock in the morning, they take attendance, and that's the attendance for the day. And it's the ADA, so it's the average daily attendance. And the ADA is what determines how much money the schools get per day per student. So instead of it being based on this many students are enrolled, this is what it takes to educate them, are they actually present that day? Which is problematic for a number of different reasons. The other thing HB 100 would really work to do is to create some partnerships between the educator programs and the districts that are needing to have somebody actually in the classroom. And so really trying to kind of bridge that gap between the educator preparedness programs and the implementation within the classroom. We do have a couple of things locally. I know that Dallas College, which used to be Dallas Community College District, has solidified as one, and they are actively working to work with the schools and work with paraprofessionals who are already serving in the classroom to become fully certified teachers because they already know the system that they're walking into. It's not a shock. It's not something that they're unaware of. They don't really have any misnomers about that. They know what they're doing. And so that's one of the big things that I personally think would be helpful. HB3 is some safety changes that came after Uvalde. I don't know how familiar the audience today is with the tragedy in Uvalde. I am sure that people are aware that we have some mass shooting issues in the US and in Texas for sure. And Uvalde was one of the more recent and more tragic, even in that spectrum, if you will. So HB3 would require at least one armed guard in every school in Texas. I want you to know that while we would require one armed guard in every school in Texas, we don't have a school counselor in every school in Texas, and we don't have a school nurse in every school in Texas. So this would literally change it so that we put the impetus on safety and guns over safety and health, if that makes sense. So it's not that there aren't both things that need to be addressed, but it is not in addition to, it is often in lieu of, or as a substitute for. HB 13 would require all district employees to complete what they refer to as a mental health first aid training to learn how to identify mental health issues and substance abuse in the classroom. This would authorize what they have titled as school guardians to carry weapons and subsidize that pay by about $25,000 a year. So I want you guys to also think about and remember that the base salary for a teacher is $38,880, and they're talking about a $25,000 supplement to carry a gun. I just think that that kind of speaks volumes. So one of the other big pushes that we have is a push for vouchers. So vouchers very much are touted as school choice, as a parent's choice. What it really amounts to is an effort to defund public education. So Senate Bill 8 argues vouchers as a choice. The reality is, in other similar legislation in different states where this has been passed, 90% of the students who take those funds and take them to a private school never attended public school. They never attended public school. They've always been private school students. It literally just takes that money and moves it into the private sector. Additionally, the expectations that are set for public schools and the expectations that are set for private schools are not always the same. And so those benchmarks and demarcations that are required in a public setting, in a parochial school or a private setting, may not be required, which means that you've got a lot more nepotism and a lot more opportunity for things to really go awry because the impetus is not put on qualifications as much as it is put on agreement with in kind of a mindset capacity. So what this basically does is remove money from public education and transfer it to the private sector. It also bans all teaching of information on sexual health and safety. That is K through 12, so that's not just for the younger students, that is for everybody in the system. So because our governor really wants to put this voucher system through, he's been withholding about $800 million in educational funds and calling special session after special session to try to get these vouchers pushed through, and has vowed to continue to do so until it's successful. There is an actual bipartisan effort. So both the Republicans and the Democrats, the largest parties here, there is a bipartisan effort from the rural areas of Texas as a pushback against the vouchers because it would effectively eliminate educational access for several people in rural areas. So those smaller districts that really are more of on a shoestring and really dependent on those dollars that they're able to actually get would be the ones who were the biggest losers in these situations, which is a lot of Texas. There are a lot of rural areas in Texas. And so that would be an incredibly problematic kind of piece for us to have in there. Currently, the estimate is that Texas kids are about $40 billion below the national average as far as state funding. It is not that we don't have the money. So while they are pulling this funding and demanding vouchers instead, literally in the last election, somebody was running commercials talking about how we could eliminate property tax because we had all of this excess money that we just didn't need. Meanwhile, one of the schools in the town that I sit in right now doesn't have an English teacher for the 7th grade. So we've got some pretty disparate understandings of educational function. And I would argue a lot of that comes from the fact that people outside of education would very much like to dictate how things are run, but they don't actually know the lay of the land. And so it's really, it's really ineffective and kind of problematic because it's not actually a functional piece back on this. So the argument now is that we should take money out of the public schools, implement vouchers, and it's about $8,000 a student. So we'll take that money and put it into private sectors. And then the surplus of tax dollars that we have would go back to the landowners. So in addition to this, we also have anti-DEI legislation, which means that DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they have decided in the state that this is problematic and have dictated that any public entities that still have DEI programs will not receive funding. So the University of Texas in Austin, which is the largest, so North Texas is the 3rd largest school. We have several large universities here, but I think we have about 47,000 students at this point, and they're bigger than us. They recently had to let go of about 60 educators because they were in programs that would no longer be funded. And if they kept those programs, they're problematic. The issue with this is, of course, racial tensions, cultural tensions, all of those things on campus have not disappeared because we've just gotten rid of DEI. And so we still have these kind of grapplings with things, but we have fewer and fewer people on campuses that are really well equipped to mitigate those conversations and act as a kind of buffer to be able to really improve on some metrics and improve on the experience of several students. So I know that there's a lot more that I could talk about there, but I feel like I've kind of given you guys a fire hose of some information, and I would be really interested to see if there was something you would like to hear more about or any questions that I could open. Yes. I can't. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah ma'am, for the wonderful explanation.
Thank you.
A new kind of knowledge, basically in Texas, you have elaborately brought in front of us. So thank you so much. Now I request dear participants for your queries. If you have, please come ahead and discuss with today's keynote speaker, Honorable Hannah ma'am. Please welcome.
Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am. Good morning to the US.
Hello.
Hello. This is Dr. Badiuddin Ahmed. I'm also an academician. Having listened to you, I had a question that the education funding in US,
yes.
Texas especially, is a very difficult one. In India, we do not have that type of, tendency or say role being played by the state, government. Especially as I was being told that the education for from primary to secondary school, the government, the public institution take care of this.
Yes, so,
but here in India, this is not really encouraging one. So most of the private players in the academics, and they're minting money like anything. And what about the situation in US regarding private sector?
As far as the private sector, I, especially coming from nonprofit, don't have an issue with the private sector. I have an issue with people working outside of education who are making dictations on education. And unfortunately, because we have a compulsory system here, the privatized stuff is typically more money driven than educationally driven. That's not always true by any means. And there are certainly programs, especially programs that are designed as kind of an educational supplement. Like if you look at some of the Kaplan things, there are some pieces in there that definitely are there to bolster and support kind of things moving forward. But the private sector by itself does not have a history of working really well in education spaces here. Typically what we find is that they get a lot of grace kind of on the front side of things because it's a new endeavor. And so they usually have a certain amount of time to kind of meet their goals. And it's really hit and miss. So there are some magnet schools here and charter schools here that are incredible. There are also some that are really bad. And because there's not a standard regulation in that kind of private piece there, we have more of an issue kind of implementing that, I think, in those spaces. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. How about university education is also very costly in the US?
Yes. It is very costly in the US, and that is something that has not always been the case. Actually, historically speaking, we used to, as a government, fund that. That ended, I think, I want to say like in the Reagan era is when we started really pulling funding from the, especially the collegiate setting. We pulled funding from that and we started funding private endeavors instead. We also have some very high needs for mental health spaces that were defunded at one point.
Ma'am? Sir, ma'am, what are the inclusive practices they are followed in school education?
The inclusive practices, it really depends on kind of what you're talking about on that, but a lot of it has to do with making sure that we're not utilizing like pejorative language. That was something that definitely came up in my thesis studies, is looking at kind of like that linguistic aspect there and how it impacted things. And for instance, multiple people that I interviewed told me that they heard homophobic language. But when they were asked if they heard any bullying, they said no. So there's a disconnect between some of those linguistic pieces there and the impact that we see. The inclusive piece, really more than anything else, also has to do with some ADA things. So that's the Office of Access and Disability. So a lot of the inclusion would be some neurodivergent students looking at kind of how to reach and teach people on the autism spectrum, being able to identify where you have a cultural bias versus a lack of information. So when the way you're asking a question is not clear to everybody, that's going to be a problem. So sometimes it even looks as far as like the language that's used on standardized testing or different forms along those lines, because things have to be relatable. But it could also be as simple as, you have a religious holiday, we're giving you space to practice that. And so looking at kind of different spaces there, because we don't have religious affiliation in the school, but you do have that freedom as an individual, regardless of where you are.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now welcome Dr. Swanand Shukla, sir, please.
Hello, good evening,
Hello.
Dr. Bedkar, sir, principal, sir, and good morning, ma'am. A wonderful presentation you have made. And it was really very, interesting that you are having 3 generations getting involved in education system. And that is a wonderful thing, what I have learned from you.
Thank you.
So you must have seen a long journey of education. And, as a child also, you must be watching your parents and how they are dealing with the education. My question is, what kind of changes or transformation of education system has taken place at Texas? Nowadays in India, we are implementing NEP, National Education Policy new, and we are making it very well oriented, and the student should get some kind of outcome after the learning process. So that is how we are moving further. So what kind of changes have you seen in this maybe 3 decades or 4 decades? So what you think about this? That is my first question. Okay. And second question is, in India, we are having more of, the theoretical lectures. But what about the skill, development among the students? And, they should think about the skill also on the other side. So what kind of programs are implemented for the skillful activities? Thank you.
Absolutely. So as far as the changes, I would argue that the biggest change that I've seen throughout those generations is the accountability of the students. And by proxy, the accountability of the parents, because they seem the most uncomfortable. And growing up and having attended school in the same place, there were things that, I'll give you a for instance. So there was an educational initiative that was adopted as far as disciplinary studies, and it had to do with how students were disciplined. And they needed to transgress in the same way multiple times for things to get increasingly more severe. So for instance, if you were teaching class and one of your students got up and yelled something inappropriate, that's one incident, okay? If that student comes back the next day and hits a classmate, that's one incident, because those are different things. And so when I was going to school, that would not have been one incident. That would have been like, bye. At no point was that okay. And so I think that we've seen a lot of, I think it is important to honor where people are coming from in their experience. It's also important to give them a realistic lay of the land and not set them up for failure outside of the classroom. So I think that that is a big piece on that one. Now, as far as the technical skills, one of the things that we really emphasize here in my role at UNT is kind of making sure that you are bolstering that you're getting that through your courses, that you were taught. If you took a course and you learned how to code in Python, like that needs to be on your resume, and the way we, denote that needs to be very clear. And so there are absolutely skills there, and there are absolutely, especially in this area, because it's very large. So it is not that we don't have educational opportunities here at all. We definitely have some of those. The problem is everyone can't access them. So we still very much have students winning engineering contests and doing very well on national and international stages and in science and all kinds of STEM fields, but it's not everybody. It's not accessible to everybody in the same way. So I think that is that because we come at it from a compulsory capacity and we argue that everyone should get that education, it needs to be addressed as such. Because the inequity that we can potentially build into that when you require people to attend school in class can be very problematic if it's not taken into consideration and people aren't cognizant of that. I know I diverged a little bit. Did that kind of get what you were going for?
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am. And I really appreciate over here. I think Texas, the welcome education is there always. Where the things are welcoming and the scholarships are available, and many things are happening over there in education system. We are having more like a competitive, the drive over there in education system. So you should score more than other, and then only you're going to get a placement. So this kind of, that difference what we can get over there. Right. So thank you very much. And we also realize, what kind of education system is there at your place, Texas. Some of my patients, I'm a doctor by the profession, so some of my patients are from the Texas. Yeah, so I get a little bit of information from Texas because I try to find out, explore the area and education system and the medical field and other things. So thank you very much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Sonu Kumar sir would like to say. Okay, then thank you, Dr. Badiuddin sir, Prashant Thote sir, and our respected Honorable Dr. Swanan Shukla sir for your nice clarity, and it have clarified by Honorable today's keynote speaker. Thank you so much. Now I request the chief organizer of an international conference, the ideal principal, Dr. M. Betkar sir, for your words. You are welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I move towards the vote of thanks. Sri Kumaraswamy Mahavidyalaya Ausa, District Latur in Maharashtra State, as we all know, that organized a world record series and the daily webinar internationally conference. For today's session, on the dais was Honorable Hannah, who talked about the topic, the state of public education in Texas, very clearly, sincerely. The topic was very interesting because the whole system have put in front of us by Honorable Hannah ma'am. How is the education policy? Then how it is, does it have a good public education? Where does the Texas rank for public education? And then different schools, private schools, the systems, all these things. Really, the ma'am have brought the whole history about the education in Texas. So it's a new for us, madam. In your lecture, we understood many system, many policies regarding the educations from the Texas. So I'm very, very thankful to you. You have paid your valuable time to the series and delivered a nice lecture. So I sincerely gratitude towards you. Thank you so much. I thank the chief organizer of the series, Honorable Dr. M. Bedkar sir. Also thanks Dr. Badiuddin sir, Prashant Thote sir, Dr. Swamin Shukla sir for the appreciation and the nice interaction with the keynote speaker. I thanks my friend Dr. Prakash Karar sir, who is the chief convener of the internationally conference. And I should not forget all those dear participants who joins regularly to the series. You people are there, so we are moving ahead. So it's happening only with your cooperation. So thanks a lot once again to you all. Kindly request everybody, please fill the feedback link which is given in the chat box. With the kind permission of chief organizer, I declare the session is over. Thank you so much once again, Honorable Hannah ma'am and Dr. Principal M. Bedkar sir. Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonu Kumar sir, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye. Anyone who wants to add me on LinkedIn, please do. I would love to connect with any of you.
Yes, ma'am. Of course. Of course. Yes. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.